morning and welcome back to the lecture series on tribal studies in India, interdisciplinary perspectives and approaches. So, today we are going to discuss methods and approaches to the study of tribes. The study of tribes has evolved from colonial, anthropological and cultural frameworks reflecting the shift in power dynamics. So, early studies on the tribals, about the tribals would be largely influenced by colonial ethnographic practices that were aimed at broadly classifying and controlling the tribal populations without necessarily attempting to understand the tribal ethos and therefore often neglecting the indigenous voices and the indigenous agency itself. So, colonial ethnographic exploits and studies on tribes primarily emphasized on the racial classification of the tribes and categorization of tribes as primitive, backward, savage, all of which are very negative, very offensive adjectives or terms to describe a people, and these were based primarily on physical anthropometry, the way the tribals appeared or the appearance of the tribes, including measurements of physical attributes to determine their racial origins. So, their height, their skin color, their features and topography, all these things comprise anthropometry, and that would shape ideas about them, the scales of their primitivity, their primitiveness, their backwardness and so forth. That was a very skewed way of understanding the tribes, a very skewed, lopsided and many a times very offensive and limited parameters for describing and understanding the tribal population. Tribes were presented as backward people in order to justify administrative control over them and reinforce stereotypes about them for easier governance. So, the classification was part of ethnographic and anthropological exploits and interventions which actually served administrative aims. Pseudoscientific methods would be used in the colonial times for legitimizing colonial authority, which were riddled with biases that even persist in the contemporary academic discourses that are based on the study of tribes or the tribals. So, the colonial style of intervention, the colonial scholarship becomes the starting point for understanding the tribes, and that's those skewed parameters still inform the scholars while trying to understand the tribals even in the contemporary times. So, it is necessary to move beyond these fixed understandings, these stereotypes and framings to highlight the socio-political and cultural identities of tribes as active agents in the course of history. In the post-independence period, nationalist narratives replaced colonial accounts, but they often followed some hierarchical research and methodological perspectives. Although Indian anthropologists integrated the contemporary socio-political contexts into their research, one sees that the indigenous knowledge systems continue to be marginalized. Most of these studies often lack the critical reflexivity concerning the researcher's positionality. To put it very plainly, whenever there is a study being conducted on the tribes or the tribals, it is necessary to have this critical reflexivity regarding the researcher's own position, whether the person is an outsider vis-a-vis the tribe, someone outsider who has come to India to study the tribes. So, every researcher carries his or her own cultural baggage which shape her perceptions. So, that really cannot be ignored, because that actually lends a bias lens, a kind of tilted lens to this whole knowledge system that is being produced. The growing influence of subaltern studies challenges the predominant narratives, emphasizing the voices of marginalized groups, including the tribes. This shift encourages more participatory and inclusive research practices. So, of late we have been trying to shift the predominant narratives as a way of reading and understanding these tribals afresh through certain inclusive research practices. Despite progress in the larger academic and research space, we see that mainstream academia continues to struggle to incorporate the indigenous epistemologies in the study of tribes and tribal communities. A critical assessment of post-colonial methodologies reveals the fact that there is a great need for decolonizing research practices. So, our research practices till recently are seen as a hangover from the colonial period, and the same biases have been passed on, have been kind of bequeathed to the researchers in the next generations. So, that those baggages, the colonial baggages need to be kind of disposed of, and new practices should be embraced, which ensure that the tribal studies bring out the lived and live experiences and perspectives of the tribal communities themselves. So, the voice of the tribals should be heard within the research space concerning them. So, anthropology has a colonial history and was an important tool for studying the tribals as well as the castes and other social categories. In the post-colonial period, anthropology evolved as a way of critiquing its colonial legacies, and it focused on cultural relativism and ethnographic immersion. So, that ethnographic eye which becomes predominant and which objectifies the tribal people, treating them just like objects and data, needs to be immersed, needs to be muffled down and toned down. What we need is to focus on cultural relativity. It is not a study in terms of hierarchy of cultures, where a non-tribal's culture is higher or better than the culture of the tribals. That cannot be a pre-given, that cannot be an a priori. Someone cannot have that in the mind while studying the tribals. There has to be cultural relativism. So, the difference, the different worldview needs to be espoused, accommodated. There has to be an attempt to understand the alternative worldview or the alternative ecosystem within which tribal life operates, right. So, this shift to cultural relativism aimed at understanding the tribes within their own cultural contexts without really comparing them to non-tribals or to any other groups. However, early anthropological studies continue to reflect the non-tribal biases, so the researcher brings with him or her the biases from their own culture, right. So, the question of superior, inferior, good, bad, all these dichotomous understandings or binary understandings take place, which is not very healthy or which do not facilitate a good research, right. So they often fail to engage and represent indigenous voices themselves. Such biases actually muffle the indigenous voices, and this often leads to misrepresentations and oversimplifications of tribes and tribal groups as well as tribal life. Next, we see that archaeology provides insights into the material culture of tribal communities and helps in reconstructing historical lifeways through artifacts, settlement patterns as well as environmental adaptations. Archaeology as a discipline helps in the conceptualization of artifacts vis-a-vis broader socio-political as well as environmental frameworks, thereby revealing how tribes interact with their surroundings as well as with their neighboring non-tribal communities. Archaeological methods include excavation, survey and analysis focusing on tools, pottery and other architectural remains or remnants in order to throw light on the evolution of tribal societies. So, archaeology as a discipline enables in bridging the historical gaps, in trying to create a historical trajectory for tribal evolution and development, linking ancient practices with contemporary tribal life and highlighting the continuity of cultural traditions. Through the integration of indigenous knowledge with archaeological findings, the researchers are able to develop comprehensive and culturally sensitive interpretations of tribal histories. Next, we have the historical lens, history as a discipline. History as a discipline explores the evolution of tribal societies through written records, oral traditions as well as archival materials, thereby offering a multifaceted or multidimensional perspective on their past. And this challenges the colonial narratives by incorporating indigenous perspectives and experiences. So, we have the other voices also coming in when we incorporate the oral traditions, the oral folklorist tradition. And we see that for a long time the mainstream historical accounts written primarily by the colonizers, the white man, have often excluded the agency and the voice, the agential position of the tribal herself or himself. So, this challenge is kind of being met, this challenge is kind of being balanced through the historical approach. The difficulty that we have out of reading only the mainstream historical accounts, where the oral traditions are not adequately present. So, when we bring the other voices, in fact the voices from within, the straight-jacketed understandings, the simplified, oversimplified, simplistic understandings are problematized and further complicated, and that renders a more well-rounded perspective to the study of tribes. So, historical methodologies analyze events, power dynamics and socioeconomic changes which affect the tribal communities, providing insights into their resilience and adaptability. Further, historical studies also emphasize the active role of tribes in shaping regional and national histories, countering the stereotype of tribes as passive recipients of historical changes. So, in the formal historiography created by the colonizers, the tribal people have been seen as passive recipients of the external changes, the external larger factors that change them, that are imposed on them. This is not true, this is not an adequate picture. The tribals themselves can be instrumental in these changes, in bringing about these changes. They are not merely passive recipients of historical changes, or they are not passive, just pawns in the larger scheme. They are not just pawns and puppets in the larger scheme. They also have their, they also partake a role. They are also kind of a stakeholder in history. That is what we are discovering, we are arguing through alternative accounts that come from within. So, these are also many histories that the study of the historical approaches in the study of tribes offer. So, integrating oral histories with archival research enables and facilitates a more inclusive, well-rounded and accurate representation of tribal experiences across diverse historical periods. So, we see that interdisciplinary approaches, interdisciplinary research, where archaeology and social sciences or sociology and history, all of these disciplines have something or the other to offer, to meaningfully engage in terms of understanding the tribals better, and this crossroads called the interdisciplinary studies promotes methodological flexibility, allowing the researcher to adapt their approaches to the specific contexts and needs of tribal communities. When we combine, for example, disciplines such as history, archaeology and anthropology, what we get is a comprehensive understanding of tribal life beyond disciplinary boundaries. This approach enables a more holistic analysis of tribal societies. Ethnohistory integrates oral traditions with archival research through providing a more accurate and nuanced reconstruction of the tribal histories or the tribal past. So, ethnohistory recognizes the value of indigenous narratives in the understanding of historical events. So, history is not something just imposed and heaved on the tribes. The tribals also shape history. They are partakers, they are stakeholders within the process of history formation. So talking about interdisciplinary approaches, archaeology contributes by uncovering material culture, offering insights into the daily lives of the tribals as well as their social structures and environmental adaptations. Cross-disciplinary insights bridge the knowledge gap between documented history and the lived experiences of the tribal communities, thereby enhancing the authenticity as well as the depth of tribal studies. So, ethnographic research method relies heavily on participant observation, where the researcher immerses themselves, or in other words, so ethnographic research method relies heavily on participant observation, where the researcher immerses themselves, or in other words, immerses their own biases, their own non-tribal cultural training when they are visiting the field, when they are visiting the tribal communities. They do not let their own cultural training inform their understanding of the tribal communities when they are documenting the daily lives of the tribals. So, early ethnographers influenced by figures like Bronislaw Malinowski, that is one major name among the tribal ethnographers that we have. So, figures like Malinowski prioritized descriptive accounts without considering the power dynamics at play between the observer and the observed. Maybe we are documenting a lot of things about the tribes based on the way we have been trained and the way our perception has been shaped through our own training that comes from outside of the tribal cosmos, right. So, that is something very much observable in the case of studies made by figures like Bronislaw Malinowski. So, ethnographic methods often impose external frameworks on tribal societies. That is, they involve the tendency to interpret the tribal practices through the prism offered by Western knowledge or through the lens offered by the Western society and Western knowledge, which often resulted in distorted, vulgarized, and very exoticized representations of the tribal groups. So, traditional ethnography is often criticized due to its extractive nature, where the data collection prioritize academic gain over the general welfare of the indigenous communities. Contemporary critics have pushed for ethical reflexivity within this process of data collection and enhancing or facilitating academic gain, which is a way of ensuring that research practice respects the autonomy and knowledge system of the tribal communities. So, decolonizing methodologies challenge traditional research paradigms through prioritizing indigenous worldviews and knowledge systems by largely shifting the focus from researcher centric to community led research. So, such approach would focus on collaborative research, where tribals are not merely subjects or objects, but rather active participants that are contributing to both the process as well as the outcomes of research. Decolonizing methodologies advocate for the dismantling of colonial power structures in academia, thereby ensuring that research practices are equitable, the research practices are fair and inclusive in nature. While doing so, reflexivity is the key factor because researchers must critically examine their own biases, own positions and impacts that they leave on the tribal communities that they study. Ultimately, decolonizing methodologies seek to restore the agency of the indigenous communities, validating their knowledge as legitimate and valuable in the larger academic discourse. So, indigenous research methods prioritize community involvement and recognition of traditional knowledge systems, which is a way of shifting from extractive models towards a participatory approach. So, methods such as oral histories, storytelling and participatory mapping provide authentic insights into tribal worldviews reflecting cultural contexts. In these methods, relational accountability is prioritized, where researchers build long-term trust-based relationships with the tribal communities that they study. So, here it becomes very important to spend a good amount of time and it is advisable to live with these communities for a longer period of time, go stay among them in their natural habitat as a way of building trust, which does not happen one fine day. It has to happen over a certain period of time, while spending time together, listening to their versions, listening to their stories and basically building up a relationship or a bond with them. So, knowledge co-production becomes central, ensuring research outcomes benefit the communities while respecting their cultural protocols as well as intellectual sovereignty. So, research should be such that the subjects of the research or even the persons whose community we are researching on are also benefited and their cultural protocols are not violated, their intellectual sovereignty is not outraged or breached. So, ethical considerations in tribal research begin with obtaining informed consent, ensuring that the participants are fully aware of a particular study's purpose, methods and potential impacts on the communities. So, it is essential for the researchers to practice reflexivity, continuously evaluating their own positionality, biases and the ethical implications of their work within the tribal contexts. Researchers must respect cultural protocols which require researchers to engage with tribal leaders and also adhere to traditional norms that govern the process of knowledge sharing and participation. So, data ownership and intellectual property rights are key ethical concerns. Tribes should retain control over their knowledge with agreements specifying how data will be used and shared. Ethical research fosters reciprocal relationships where benefits flow back to the community through knowledge sharing, capacity building and policies which support tribal autonomy. So, talking about the contemporary trends and methodological innovations within the tribal research, we see that indigenous led research is on the rise, where tribal scholars design and lead studies, shifting control over knowledge production to the communities themselves, thereby challenging the traditional academic hierarchies, where the tribals did not have a large claim or a large share. From there on, we see that the tribals become visible within the researches that concern them. So, advocacy based research focuses on influencing policy and promoting social justice, thereby integrating academic work with activism as a way of supporting tribal rights and community development initiatives. Collaborative networks between academic institutions and tribal organizations foster knowledge exchange, supporting interdisciplinary approaches and ethical research practices. So, innovative and modern methods such as visual ethnography incorporate photography as well as film to capture the dynamic aspects of tribal life, thereby offering new ways of representing indigenous cultures. Narrative inquiry emphasizes personal stories and lived experiences, providing rich qualitative insights into tribal worldviews. Methods such as collaborative ethnography involve co-authoring research with tribal members, which ensure accuracy and ethical representation. Further, we see that mobile and digital technologies facilitate real-time data collection, enhancing the efficiency and inclusivity of fieldwork. As a way of concluding our discussion today, the study of tribes and tribal communities has evolved from colonial frameworks to include interdisciplinary, decolonized and indigenous methodologies. Ethical considerations, including informed consent and community engagement, are central to studying tribal communities by using any methodology or approaches. So, decolonizing methodologies challenge the traditional academic paradigms and practices, thereby promoting equity and inclusivity of the tribals themselves in the process of knowledge production. Contemporary trends emphasize participatory, reflexive, ethically accountable, indigenous led and policy oriented research, which reflects the dynamic nature of tribal studies as a field. So, with this we come to the end of our lecture here today. Let us meet with a new topic and another round of discussions in our next lecture. Thank you.